Madison had always been the shadow in her own family, the daughter no one talked about in funny stories. The one without a real seat at the table. And the one who had to pretend the silence didn't hurt. For years, she tried to change herself, be softer, ask for less, stay patient, hoping that if she was good enough, quiet enough, they would finally see her, accept her, and love her the way they always had with her perfect older brother. But all that effort only made Madison feel more invisible in the place she was supposed to call home. Until one night, at what seemed like just another family gathering, when the same old hurtful words were thrown her way. Madison stood up, faced them all, and walked out of the house that had never really been home. That night, she didn't just leave, she chose herself. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, like no matter how hard you tried, you were never enough, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and follow my journey as I let go of the pain. Walk away from what no longer serves me, and build a life rooted not in approval, but in peace, purpose, and self-love. Madison had always been on the margins of her own family, not because she lacked effort or wasn't good enough, but because from a young age, she had been labeled as different, too quiet, too sensitive, never quite right. She was the youngest, the daughter in a family where all the attention revolved around her older brother, Lucas. The golden child, the one her parents never stopped bragging about. Madison didn't envy him. At first, all she wanted was to be heard, to be seen, to feel like she truly belonged. But the cold indifference slowly chipped away at her, leaving fractures that only she seemed to notice. Even in childhood, the favoritism showed in the smallest things. A simple birthday with a crooked cake and a bargain bin book for Madison, compared to Lucas's extravagant party the year before. Complete with balloons, pizza, and a brand new bike. When she asked why he got so much more, her mother just smiled tightly and said, "Lucas is more social, sweetie. It's different." That wasn't an explanation, it was a dismissal, a reminder that her place in the family was less. Madison kept trying. She once spent hours making a handmade Father's Day card, drawing a picture of her and her dad fishing. Even though it had only happened once, she stood by the window all day waiting for him. He never came home. When she asked the next morning where he'd been, he said, "Work comes first. You'll understand when you're older." But she did grow older, and she still didn't understand. As time passed, the little things became patterns. Unspoken, unacknowledged, but painfully real. Family dinners where she was barely addressed. Vacations she wasn't invited to. Holidays where her name was misspelled on the card, if it appeared at all. Madison became an expert at reading the room, knowing when to stay quiet, when to make herself smaller. Not because she was wrong, but because she was inconvenient. In her family, every emotion she expressed was labeled as too sensitive or too dramatic. Then came that night, the 50th wedding anniversary of her parents, Harold and Denise. The house was filled with relatives, neighbors, and old friends. The air buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and polished smiles. Everyone looked like they belonged, except Madison. She sat at the far end of the table, just like always, not quite out of the frame, but never in focus either. She had bought a new dress, something that felt like strength instead of softness. She even brought a gift, an old family photo she'd restored and framed in polished walnut. It sat untouched beside the centerpiece, like it didn't exist. She was about to quietly excuse herself when her father's voice sliced through the noise like a blade. "Don't pretend you matter to this family." The room froze. The words didn't come with anger, they came with cold finality. As if her very existence was a burden. He didn't even look at her. And then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "You're only here because your mother insisted." Madison sat still, not out of shock, but recognition. She'd heard these kinds of things for years, just not always out loud. This time, though, it wasn't the words that stung the most, it was how familiar they felt. Her brother Lucas chuckled and added, "Honestly, we forget you exist half the time." And again, no one corrected him, no one defended her. All the faces she had known all her life, not one of them looked surprised. Something burned in Madison's chest. But this time, there were no tears, just heat, not rage, but clarity. She picked up her glass of water, tapped the rim with her fork, once. Clear and deliberate. The room fell silent. Even Lucas's smirk faded. "I won't take much of your time," she said, just 3 sentences. She stood slowly, Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. Her father finally looked at her, with a smirk, waiting for her to embarrass herself. But she held his gaze. The first sentence came out soft, but landed like thunder. I have loved this family with every part of me you decided wasn't good enough. Someone exhaled sharply. Her mother blinked, smile fading like a stain dissolving in water. Madison let the silence sit. Then she spoke the second sentence. After tonight, you'll never have to pretend I exist again. Lucas shifted uncomfortably. Her father crossed his arms and leaned back. But for the first time, he didn't look smug, he looked unsettled. Madison said nothing else. She placed her glass down, turned, and walked toward the door. No one stopped her, not until she reached the front entrance and her mother called, Madison? She didn't turn around. Her father slammed the table. Lucas muttered something, but Madison was already gone. The cold night air bit at her cheeks like a release. She hadn't planned to leave early. She had hoped, just one more time, to be seen, and maybe that was the saddest part, that after all these years, some part of her still believed there was something she could do to earn their love. But that part of her stayed behind in that dining room. Madison had heard harsh words before, dismissive comments, cold looks, nods that felt more like obligations than care. But that night, at her parents' 50th wedding anniversary celebration, something crossed the line. Her father, Harold, didn't just hurt her with his words. He shattered the last sliver of hope she had ever held onto. When he said, "Don't pretend you matter to this family," and followed it with, "You're only here because your mother insisted." Madison knew, truly knew, that she had never been considered part of the family in the way that mattered. Her brother, Lucas, chuckled and tossed in his own cruelty. "Honestly, we forget you exist half the time." The room froze. The laughter died. Forks hovered mid-air, but no one objected. No one said, "That's enough." No one defended her. The silence was worse than the insults, it was complicity. A burning rose in Madison's chest. But not a single tear followed. Not anymore. She was no longer the girl who used to wait on the porch for her dad to come home. No longer the daughter who tried to get everything just right so someone, anyone, might notice her. That night, she stood up, holding her glass of water. She gently tapped the rim with her fork, once. Clear and deliberate, the sound cut through the room like a bell. Everyone turned. Even Lucas stopped smirking. "I won't take up much of your time," Madison said, her voice calm and unnervingly steady. Just 3 sentences. All eyes were on her now. For the first time in years, the entire room truly saw her, not as a background figure, but as someone fully present, no longer willing to shrink. Her first sentence was soft, but carried the weight of a lifetime. "I have loved this family with every part of me you decided wasn't good enough." You could feel the air change. Her mother, Denise, blinked rapidly. The fake smile she'd been wearing vanished like steam on glass. Madison gave the silence a few seconds to settle, then continued. Her second sentence. "After tonight, you'll never have to pretend to remember I exist again." Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Harold leaned back, arms crossed, trying to look unmoved. But this time, there was no smugness in his eyes, only something unfamiliar, uncertainty. Madison said nothing else, not because she didn't have more to say, but because those words were enough. They were closure. They were truth. She placed her glass on the table, turned, and walked slowly toward the door. No one stopped her. No one called out. Not until her hand touched the doorknob did she hear her mother's voice. Soft and wavering. "Madison?" She didn't turn back. The door creaked open, and the night air hit her like a release. Cold, biting, honest. She hadn't brought a coat. She hadn't planned to leave early. She had hoped, just one last time, that she might be seen. Might be wanted. But that part of her? It stayed behind, in that dining room. As she stepped down the front steps, she paused, then turned her head slightly, not to look back, but to say her final words. No yelling, no drama, just a simple, quiet line that closed the door on everything behind her. "Take care of each other. Because this is your last chance to take care of me." Then she walked away. No one chased her, no apologies, no explanations. Behind her, she heard the door slam. Lucas muttering something under his breath. But the noise didn't reach her. With each step down the gravel driveway, Madison felt lighter. That night, she didn't feel heartbreak. She felt freedom. She didn't need their permission. She didn't need their love to be whole. She had finally stepped out of the role they had cast her in since childhood. And with every step forward, she wasn't the leftover, forgotten daughter anymore. She was someone who had chosen her own path. And she would never again ask for a seat at a table that was never meant for her. After that night, after the door to her parents' house quietly clicked shut behind her, Madison didn't feel like she was escaping. She felt like she was finally returning to herself. For the first time in 31 years, she wasn't living to please anyone. She wasn't checking her phone hoping for a message that might mean she finally mattered. She wasn't bending herself into someone more palatable, more pleasing, more silent. She was simply living for herself. Her small apartment above the bakery on the corner, once a stopgap, now felt like a beginning. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was hers. Bit by bit, Madison made the space her own. She hung soft yellow curtains that made the morning sun feel like honey. She bought abstract art prints at a flea market, built a wobbly bookshelf by hand, and smiled every time she walked past it. There were no family portraits on the walls, no heirlooms, no ghosts, just pictures of places she'd gone alone. A foggy lake in Maine, a city street in fall, her hands covered in clay during a pottery class. They were all proof of a life she had built, by herself. For herself. And she started writing, not for anyone else, just for her. A plain journal, no flowers or quotes, just blank pages waiting to be filled. On the first page, she wrote, "I don't owe anyone my silence ever again." Writing became her ritual. Every night, she lit a candle, curled up under the quilt her college roommate had given her, and poured her thoughts onto the page. No apologies, no filters, just truth. She returned to art, a forgotten love pushed aside long ago in favor of being practical for the family. Tuesday nights, she took a watercolor class. Her hands trembled the first time she picked up a brush, but eventually, she found herself smiling when the colors bled past the lines. She wasn't painting for praise or performance. She was painting for peace. On Saturdays, Madison visited the local farmer's market. At the same flower stand, an older woman named Margot always tucked a sprig of lavender into her bouquet and said, "For calm." Over time, they became friends, not because of obligation or blood, but because of kindness. Her friendships changed too. The ones built on guilt and imbalance faded. In their place were people who saw her, valued her, and made space for her, without conditions. They didn't ask her to shrink. They didn't call her too sensitive. They didn't make her feel like a burden. And within these little rituals, fresh flowers, smudged paint, the scratch of a pen across paper, Madison found pieces of herself she thought had been lost for good. She began to ask new questions, not, "What do they need from me?" but, "What do I want for myself?" She didn't always have the answers. But for the first time, she had the right question. And that was enough. She was no longer performing, no longer chasing acceptance from people who had always withheld it. She was creating something new, a quiet, steady life rooted not in revenge or rebellion, but in love, love for herself. Madison didn't need to be chosen by a family that once made her feel invisible. Because now, finally, she had chosen herself. Madison's life grew quieter, not because all the wounds had healed, but because they had stopped bleeding every day. She wasn't constantly on edge anymore, waiting for a message, an apology, or a sign that she finally mattered. But then, one winter morning, as she poured tea and watched the snow swirl outside her window, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She hesitated. She didn't usually answer unknown callers, but something deep in her gut whispered, "It's your mother." Madison picked up without saying a word. On the other end, a thin, tentative voice said, "Madison?" There was a long pause. Madison stayed silent, letting her mother fill the space with nervous small talk about the weather, an old bakery they used to visit, anything but what truly mattered. Eventually, her mother got to the point. "Your father's birthday is coming up. He mentioned you. We're having a dinner. You should come." The invitation hung in the air like a frayed rope tossed across a chasm, hoping to pull Madison back. But she just looked out the window at the streaks of rain on the glass and said, calmly and clearly, "I won't be able to make it." "Oh," her mother's voice cracked. "Maybe next time?" Madison didn't hesitate. There won't be a next time. She ended the call before her mother could say anything more. No tears, no trembling hands, just stillness, like the calm that follows a long, hard storm. A week later, Another message came in. This time, she recognized the number immediately. Connor. Her older brother, the one who had sat at the head of the table and laughed when she was humiliated in front of everyone. His message was short. We were talking about you. Mom cries sometimes. I'm sorry. Madison didn't respond right away. She let the message sit there, unopened like a leaf pressed inside an old book. When she finally replied, there was no anger, just clarity. I'm glad you realize it now. But I'm not coming back. Not even just to visit? He asked. His tone suddenly small, like a boy who didn't quite understand what he'd lost. Madison typed slowly. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not that girl anymore either. And it was true. She wasn't the girl who sat silently at the edge of the table, hoping someone would notice her. She wasn't the daughter who needed approval to feel valid. She had grown far past that version of herself. Not long after, a letter arrived, handwritten, with familiar shaky script. It was from her mother. There were no grand speeches, no begging, just quiet admissions stitched together like someone walking barefoot across broken glass. I miss you. Time has made me think. Forgotten birthdays, empty chairs, the things I once thought were small now echo in my chest. I wish I'd been braver. I wish I'd loved better. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know, I see it now. Madison folded the letter gently and set it down. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She just sat with it. Because she knew, the letter wasn't truly for her. It was for her mother. A confession. A release. And Madison didn't need to respond. Not because she was bitter. Not out of spite. But because she no longer owed anyone her pain. She didn't need to help them feel better about the damage they had caused. She didn't need to reopen scars just so they could finally see how deep they had gone. Some apologies aren't bridges. They're acknowledgments. And that's all they'll ever be. Madison had spent too many years waiting at a door that never opened. Now, even if someone knocked, she wouldn't answer, not out of anger, but out of peace. Because peace, she had learned, doesn't need permission. And this time, she had chosen herself. Time passed. Since that anniversary night, Madison hadn't reached out to anyone in her family. Not out of anger, not as a punishment, just as a quiet act of protection. Because silence had always been the language they spoke best. And this time, she chose to answer them in kind. Then one day, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. She nearly let it go to voicemail. But out of old habit, she answered. Madison. The voice on the other end was thin, trembling. It was her mother. Denise. She didn't begin with an apology. Didn't say the words Madison once waited years to hear. Instead, she filled the silence with soft, brittle small talk. How the weather had been. How the local bakery still sold the same pie Madison used to love. And how Harold's birthday was coming up. Your father, he mentioned you. We're having a small dinner. You should come. The invitation hung there, suspended in static. Madison stood in her little kitchen, staring at the rain sliding down the window. And didn't hesitate. I won't be there, she said calmly, as if stating the weather. Her mother paused. Oh, maybe, another time? There won't be another time, Mom. And she ended the call before Denise could respond. She didn't cry. She didn't feel triumphant. She just felt still, like something had finally ended, not with a bang, but with a quiet sigh. A few days later, her brother Lucas called. She recognized the number instantly, and nearly let it ring out. But again, some old reflex made her answer. Madison, he said, no fake cheer, just her name, raw, unpolished. We were talking about you the other night. She said nothing. It's strange not having you around. He continued. Mom cries a lot. Dad, well, he's still himself, but you know how he is. Then came the words she had once begged for. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much we were hurting you. I always thought you were just dramatic. That word, that label they used to dismiss every tear, every plea, every attempt she ever made to be seen. She almost laughed, but instead, she took a deep breath. I'm glad you realize it now, she said, but I'm not coming back. Lucas hesitated. Not even just to visit? I'm not angry anymore, Lucas, but I'm not that girl anymore either. Silence stretched between them, and then, in the softest voice she'd ever heard from him, he said, we miss you. Madison didn't respond, but inside, the truth curled around her like a whisper. You miss the version of me that made you feel comfortable, not who I truly am. She hung up the phone. No shaking hands, no tears, just peace. The apologies had come. The door had creaked open once more. But Madison had chosen not to walk through it, not out of bitterness or pride, but because she had found something far more sacred: peace. She didn't need awkward dinners or forced reconciliation. She didn't want a watered-down version of love. She didn't need a family that remembered her only when her absence became inconvenient. And then, one winter afternoon, a letter arrived, neatly folded, handwritten in shaky cursive. Denise's handwriting. There was no begging, no guilt, just honesty. Denise wrote of missing her daughter, of how memories that once seemed trivial, forgotten birthdays, empty chairs, cold silences, now echoed in her mind. She admitted she hadn't been brave enough to speak up, hadn't loved enough, hadn't seen clearly until now. At the very end, one line stood alone. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know, I see it now. Madison folded the letter. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just sat in quiet stillness. She didn't write back, not out of spite, but because there was nothing more to say. Some wounds don't need explanations. Some closings come not with words, but with silence. Madison didn't return. She didn't try to fix what had long been broken, because she finally understood. Forgiveness didn't always need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes, forgiveness was just choosing to stop expecting what never came. And for Madison, the truest forgiveness was the peace she now lived in. Madison used to believe that closure required a conversation, a hug, an apology, a tearful reunion like in the movies, where all misunderstandings were resolved and she was welcomed back as if nothing had ever gone wrong. But after everything she had endured, Madison came to understand. Closure doesn't need reconciliation, it needs release. When she walked out of her parents' 50th anniversary dinner, the one where Harold publicly humiliated her, where Lucas laughed at her pain, and where Denise stayed silent, she didn't look back. She was no longer the daughter begging for acknowledgement, no longer the invisible guest at her own family's table. Her silence wasn't submission anymore. It was self-possession. In the weeks that followed, Madison didn't block anyone, but she didn't reach out either. When Harold and Denise called, when Lucas awkwardly muttered his apologies, she didn't respond with anger. She just chose not to return. Not because she hated them, but because she had finally found peace without them. She had come to realize that no apology could undo years of being unseen. One evening, while making tea in her quiet apartment, warm with cinnamon and stillness, Madison looked out the window at the falling snow. A thought rose in her chest. She wasn't the forgotten daughter of the Evans family anymore. Not the girl who waited at the window with a handmade card. Not the teenager alone at graduation reading a last-minute excuse. Not the woman in her best dress, holding a carefully chosen gift that was left untouched beside a centerpiece. She had stopped trying to be loved. Closure, for Madison, didn't come in the form of validation or apology. It came when she no longer needed someone else to see her pain for her to begin healing. She started journaling, not for anyone else, but to finally listen to herself. She joined a watercolor class on Tuesday nights, not to impress, but to feel joy again. She strolled through weekend farmers markets, picking out lavender from an older vendor who smiled and said, "This one's for calm," and Madison felt it, a calm she had never known at home. Her apartment slowly became hers in every way. A crooked bookshelf she built by hand, soft yellow curtains that made mornings feel warmer, a mismatched thrifted rug that made her laugh. There were no family portraits, no heirlooms, just snapshots of her own life, a foggy lake in Maine, a city skyline, her clay-covered hands from a pottery class. They weren't memories with others, they were memories made for her. By her. The quiet in her home was not the silence she grew up with. It wasn't cold or punishing. It was spacious, healing, and kind. Madison realized that forgiveness didn't have to be an invitation. It didn't require her to reopen wounds for others to understand how deep they ran. It simply meant she no longer needed to carry the burden of waiting for change that would never come. She no longer waited for a letter from Harold, or for Denise to show up at her door with tear-stained cheeks, or for Lucas to awkwardly knock and say, "You mattered to me too." Because Madison knew, if love has to be begged for after years of neglect, it was never love to begin with. Closure didn't look like tears anymore. It looked like a morning coffee brewed slowly, with no hesitation to check her phone. It looked like passing old family photos on her computer without stopping to open them. It looked like deleting a number without guilt. She remembered, but she didn't live there anymore. And when she looked in the mirror now, she no longer saw someone too sensitive. She saw someone deeply attuned to her emotions. No longer too loud or too quiet, she was just enough. Enough for herself. That was closure. No dramatic ending, no audience, no applause. Just one morning, she woke up, made breakfast, and didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone ever again. She had left the table where no seat had ever truly been set for her. And she never planned to go back. Madison once believed that strength meant confrontation, raising your voice, demanding to be heard, forcing others to see the truth. But now, in the calm of her small apartment, sunlight slipping through soft yellow curtains and the kettle beginning to hum, she realized something deeper. True strength often lives in silence. Her silence wasn't surrender. It wasn't fear or avoidance. It was a choice. One made deliberately and with clarity. She no longer needed an apology from Harold, the father who had long stopped seeing her with kindness. She no longer craved a forced embrace from Denise, the mother who had chosen silence over standing up for her. And Lucas, the brother who had mistaken cruelty for humor, was no longer someone she hoped would finally understand. No one was punished, but she didn't return. When Harold reached out with short bursts of guilt and then silence, she didn't answer. When Denise mailed her a trembling letter full of quiet regrets, Madison didn't tear it up or hold it to her chest like a child starved for affection. She read it, felt it, and then folded it carefully, placing it in a drawer, not to forget, but to acknowledge it as something that belonged to the past. In that moment, she knew she had taken back control of her story. No one could rewrite her memories. No one could tell her it wasn't that bad, or all families are complicated. Madison didn't need validation. She didn't have to scream, "You hurt me," just to feel seen. She had finally seen herself, and that was enough. She had created a life that once had been denied to her by the very people who were supposed to help her build it. They said she was too sensitive, too quiet, too different, but those very traits had become the foundation of a life that was steady, meaningful, and real. Every Tuesday night, she sat at her easel, letting watercolors bleed through old pain. On weekends, she walked to the local market, where the lavender lady always remembered her name. Her apartment slowly came to reflect her. No heirlooms, no family portraits, just small, intentional fragments. A foggy photo of a lake in Maine, a crooked bookshelf she built herself, a cactus that somehow survived 2 winters. She chose herself, again and again, not to prove a point to Harold, Denise, or Lucas, not to make them regret anything, but to remind herself that she was always worthy of love, even if it only came from within. One day, a distant cousin messaged her, "I heard about everything. People are whispering, wondering." Madison smiled softly. Let them wonder. Let them swap stories, assign blame, rewrite timelines. The truth didn't live with them anymore. It lived here, with her. In the life she had shaped, the voice she had reclaimed, and the silence she had chosen. And that silence, it wasn't a void. It was a declaration. She had stepped away from the role she'd been assigned since childhood, the outsider, the scapegoat, the one who was always too much. Without her, the old family script fell apart. No one left to ridicule. No one left to absorb the pain. That was power, not loud, but unshakable. Not revenge, not defiance, just the steady, quiet resolve of someone who had finally walked away. When her friends toasted to chosen family at a small dinner in her apartment, when candles flickered and jazz hummed in the background, Madison looked around and smiled. No one mentioned Harold. No one asked about Denise or Lucas. They were no longer the central characters in her story. And that was the most beautiful kind of revenge. Not making them hurt, but living well, on the very terms they once told her she never could.